The following is an excerpt that was cut from my Night in the Woods video because it became so lengthy in and of itself that I felt it distracted from the main critique. That said, I was proud of the work I'd done and feel it's something important worth discussing. So instead of just throwing it out, I made it into its own addendum video. I hope you all enjoy! I'm about to go off on a lengthy tangent regarding music and video games in general, but it does relate back to my opinions on Night in the Woods music, so please bear with me. I feel there's a sort of mindset with music that it can't be critiqued. It's one of those things that's so universally consumed and loved that it separates itself from the less ubiquitous arts like painting, theater, or literature. In my experience, people tend to rely more heavily on pathos than any sort of further dissection when it comes to the artistic merit of music. This creates a large divide where many people can't tell the difference between something that took years of study to compose and a song that could be played with 4 basic chords after a single piano lesson. Now, that's not to undermine the importance of pathos. Music has always been the main channel through which emotion is imparted to the player in video games, due at first to technical limitations and then to long-standing tradition. To deny that simple manipulative effect would be idiotic, but from an intellectual standpoint, why should we discuss the music at all if we don't have something insightful to say about it? My theory is that we referring to critics and reviewers, do it because that is the template that has been set up. We follow the basics and discuss the things everyone discusses without really thinking about why or what information we're actually imparting. I get increasingly infuriated each time I hear the phrase, "There's no such thing as bad music, it's all about personal taste." Some music does take a higher level of technical skill to produce, and thus some people who have an understanding of music theory, or literature, or theater, are bound to have a more sophisticated palette that comes along with said knowledge, that lets them have a stronger say in what music is better than other music, what novels are better than other novels, and what stage performances are better than other stage performances. Thus, a scale of good to bad would theoretically be formed. In other words, just because a layman can't tell quality from lack thereof does not mean that a scale of quality does not exist in some form or another. Though that scale would be more like a grid or even a 3D axis than it would be a straight line, but I digress. I know this is a strange logical tangent to go on, especially considering that I don't have a comprehensive understanding of music theory or even a complex knowledge of a particular genre's history myself. I can read sheet music at about the skill level of a preschooler struggling through their first Dr. Seuss book, despite having spent a decade performing in musical theater and choir, and having the most basic grasp of how to play guitar. So I may be coming off as a bit hypocritical here, but bear with me. People assume music is well composed because they can attach a certain emotion to it without thinking any more deeply about it. Following on from that, I've also discovered that music is one of those things that people prefer to be simple. The untrained ear doesn't generally enjoy dissonant tones or time signatures that stray far from the simple 4/4 structure that most pop music tends to follow. For example, I really don't enjoy the sound of this song in particular despite it being purposefully constructed to sound harsh. Let me play it for you. This is a dungeon theme from Star Ocean 3 entitled Fly Away into the Violet Sky. It's just music, right? There's nothing that anyone can say about it that could arguably be considered intelligent or critique-like, right? Well, I disagree. Here's a couple things I noticed about the song. The drum beats are articulated in a way that resembles a pulsing of a heart, which is followed by small stutters of hesitation on the offbeat. The placement of these drum beats convey both the excitement and dread of entering an unknown location. You could also argue that the drum beat is not the sound of a heart, but instead the hesitation in the soldier's march, but the same basic principle is being conveyed. The keyboard swings back and forth between a fast-paced jam that is used to convey excitement and a high-pitched whine that feels as if it's attempting to replicate a theremin, an instrument best known for its use in the Doctor Who and original Star Trek theme song. Here's an example of the instrument on its own to make sure you understand what I'm talking about. The particular sound that this instrument can make is often used to signify the mysteries of space and to lend a sci-fi feel to the piece, which is incredibly fitting given that Star Ocean is a sci-fi game in a similar vein to Star Trek. With all that in mind, the song very clearly represents what the game is about. It's about exploring unknown places, and it has a sci-fi twist. I gleaned a clear interpretation from this song, though I admit it may be an incorrect one, and in that sense I feel it has artistic merit, but I still don't enjoy it. Having said that, most people don't even think that deeply when it comes to dissecting music, especially in video games, and frankly, that should be the absolute minimum effort put in. I am admitting that musically, I'm an idiot, so imagine what sort of interpretations and deconstruction could be done by those with actual musical training. Of course, we can't expect every game reviewer to dissect every single track on a game's OST, but if they're going to claim a soundtrack is good, they should at least have some evidence to back up that claim. So, what does this have to do with Night in the Woods? Well, I bring this up because I feel people are going to consider the music in Night in the Woods to be better than it actually is because it complements some truly amazing writing with some heavy emotional themes, despite the fact that the music is mostly uninteresting without the added context that the game provides. This isn't a problem just with Night in the Woods, by the way. I see it all the time in gaming journalism, to the point where I've debated dropping the music sections of these videos altogether because, frankly, I don't have the knowledge to properly critique OSTs, as the vast majority of gaming critics don't, whether they want to admit it or not. Then again, the vast majority of game reviewers don't understand good game design either, or even how their own rating systems are supposed to work, and I feel that those are much more damning issues, but that's a topic for another time. Anyway, I'm going to try to explain my stance by letting a song from Night in the Woods play for about 30 seconds without any context, and then compare it to music from another game without context so that even those of us without musical training can hopefully get a feel for what I'm referring to with this comparison. Now, I didn't pick the catchiest song the game has to offer, but I feel I picked a song that is incredibly representative of the majority of the soundtrack. This sort of meandering muzak that admittedly works well in context, it isn't terrible to listen to outside of the game, but it's not exactly striking or visceral and doesn't really impart a message of its own accord. If I try to guess what the game was about based upon the music as I did with Star Ocean, I'm sort of left with nothing. I mean, I guess I could argue it invokes a sort of nostalgic or content vibe, but even that could just be colored by the fact that I've already played the game so many times. Now, on to the next example. Some will argue this isn't a true comparison as they are completely different types of games, and that's a fair argument in a sense, but I purposefully didn't choose a bombastic battle theme or an overly morose orchestrated piece. I chose a town theme for this example, so they'll be as comparable as possible to one another. Now, I've yet to play Skies of Arcadia, which I know is a huge mark on my JRPG record, but just from this simple town theme, I'm able to get a glimpse of what the intention of the song was. The flutes impart a playfulness, the strings once again imply adventure, but it's much more rhythmic and smooth compared to the erraticness of the Star Ocean theme I played. The cymbal crashes the exclamation point at the end of the musical sentence, giving the extra kick to support the pre-established themes. Now, I'm sure some of you can argue with my interpretations or even glean your own interpretation of the piece from Night in the Woods in the same way that I did for the other two songs, and that's great. That is where discussion comes from, and I applaud it. This is what I want. I just personally didn't gain much from Night in the Woods soundtrack. This is all only theoretical, of course, and completely circumvents the argument that critiquing the quality of a game's soundtrack without the narrative or gameplay backing it up is pointless anyway, because games are a medium that take advantage of so many different aspects from writing, framing, graphic design, level design, player interactivity, background systems, that they all need to be considered as a whole. On the other hand, the OST on its own should be destructible, otherwise there's no way to prove it's a good OST, right? I mean, it can be fitting for the game itself, which is arguably all it needs to be, but that doesn't make it a great soundtrack alone. For example, horror games often fall into this category. They often contain inconsistent sounds and quiet tension, but that comes down more to good sound design than having a good soundtrack. Yes, I know there are exceptions, that's neither here nor there. The point is, I don't really have an answer to that at the moment, of whether or not the soundtrack has to to be good on his own merits. This is just sort of a thought experiment that came to my mind while I was typing this up, and I'd love to hear someone else's feedback regarding it. So what was my goal with this then? Well, the same goal I normally have, to get people to think more deeply about the media they consume. And it's a bit of a pet peeve of mine when people attempt to act informed about things that they know nothing about. I've basically discovered that any mention of music in pretty much any video game review ever is pointless, because all it comes down to is the writer's personal taste, and not an informed stance. It basically makes those sections of the review an accidental waste of time. It's very rare that I see someone actually try and dissect the music or discuss why it's important to the particular game, instead of just a blanket, I like the music. This is even something I've been guilty of, so please don't get offended by it. Just take it as something to consider. I guess you can still argue that it all comes down to opinion at some point, but an educated opinion is worth 1 million uneducated ones. And there you have it, the excerpt I cut from my Night in the Woods video. Let me know if you enjoyed this or what you think, because I've done this before. I've cut sections from my reviews because I felt they got too off base, and I've just deleted them. But if I can actually turn them into something new and you guys are interested in hearing it, I may keep these going. It doesn't take much extra effort. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. See you all later.